Venus Sterling thought she had found the perfect victim, a quiet young man with worn clothes and desperate eyes, willing to endure anything for a chance at success. For 6 months, she tortured him with a cruelty that would have broken most people. She made him crawl under conference tables while she conducted million-dollar deals. She charged him money for damages he never caused. She forced him to clean executive bathrooms with a toothbrush while important clients watched. Venus believed she was teaching him a lesson about knowing his place in the world. She told him he was nothing, came from nothing, and would always be nothing. Every day, she found new ways to strip away his dignity and crush his spirit. But Venus made one fatal mistake. She never bothered to learn who Peter Graham really was. When a fleet of black luxury cars pulled up to her building that morning, Venus assumed they were just another group of wealthy clients to impress. When the distinguished elderly man stepped out surrounded by lawyers and executives, she saw only an opportunity to showcase her power. She had no idea she was about to come face to face with one of the most powerful men in America. She couldn't have imagined that the broken young man she had been tormenting was about to inherit a fortune that would make her company look like pocket change. Venus Sterling thought she was the predator in this story. She was about to discover she had been hunting a lion while thinking it was a lamb. And lions, when they finally reveal their true nature, have very long memories and very sharp teeth. The marble floors of Prestige Marketing Agency gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Peter Graham pushed his worn sneakers against the polished surface. At 22, he looked even younger with his oversized thrift store button-down hanging loose on his thin frame. The sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms that had grown lean from too many skipped meals and not enough sleep. It was past midnight on a Tuesday, and the 42nd floor of the Manhattan high-rise stood eerily quiet except for the soft shuffling of Peter's footsteps as he moved between cubicles, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks. This had become his routine over the past 6 months as an unpaid intern at one of New York's most prestigious marketing firms. Peter paused at a mahogany desk covered in scattered papers and empty coffee cups. The nameplate read, Jake Morrison, Vice President of Marketing. Even the VPs left their workstations looking like disaster zones, expecting someone else to clean up after them. Peter carefully organized the scattered documents, making sure not to disturb any important contracts or presentations. His stomach growled loudly in the silence. The vending machine crackers he'd eaten for dinner had worn off hours ago, but he couldn't afford anything else until his small freelance graphic design payment came through next week. Peter had learned to ignore hunger pangs. They were just another part of his daily existence now. The elevator chimed in the distance, its mechanical voice announcing the 42nd floor. Peter's head snapped up. Nobody came to the office this late except security, and they usually stayed on the ground level. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor, accompanied by the sharp clicking of expensive heels. Where is that pathetic intern? The voice cut through the silence like a blade. Venus Sterling's tone could freeze blood even on a warm night. Peter's hands trembled slightly as he quickly finished organizing Jake's desk. He knew that voice all too well. Venus Sterling, the 42-year-old CEO who had built Prestige Marketing from nothing into a $100 million empire, had a reputation that preceded her everywhere she went. Ruthless, calculating, and completely devoid of empathy for anyone she considered beneath her status. There you are. Venus appeared around the corner, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her sharp features look even more angular. She wore a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than Peter made in 6 months, if he actually got paid anything at all. Behind her trailed Rebecca Torres, the 35-year-old HR director whose job seemed to consist entirely of enabling Venus's worst behaviors. Rebecca carried a tablet and wore the expression of someone who had long ago sold their conscience for a steady paycheck and dental benefits. Mrs. Sterling, Peter said quietly, straightening up from the desk. I was just finishing the cleaning routine for this floor. Is there something you need? Venus's laugh was sharp and humorless. Something I need? What I need is for unpaid interns to do their jobs without destroying company property. She gestured dramatically toward her corner office. Do you want to explain to me why my desk looks like a hurricane hit it? Peter's brow furrowed in confusion. He had cleaned Venus's office earlier that evening, just like he did every night. Her desk had been spotless when he left it, with every pen in its proper holder and every document neatly stacked according to her ridiculous organizational system. I cleaned your office around 9 p.m., Mrs. Sterling. Everything was organized exactly how you specified in the manual you gave me. Don't lie to me, you little charity case. Venus's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. My coffee cup is shattered on the floor, there are papers everywhere, and my computer keyboard is covered in some kind of sticky residue. Are you going to stand there and tell me that's how you left my office? Peter felt his stomach drop. He distinctly remembered being extra careful around Venus's desk because she had screamed at him the previous week for moving her stapler 2 inches to the left. There was no way he had left her office in the condition she was describing. Mrs. Sterling, I promise you that's not how I left your office. Maybe something happened after I finished cleaning. The overnight security team sometimes. Are you suggesting that our security team destroyed my office? Venus stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than her shouting. Are you implying that someone else is responsible for your incompetence? Rebecca stepped forward, tapping on her tablet. Peter, I'm going to have to write this up as a formal incident report. Destruction of company property is grounds for immediate termination of your internship. But I didn't. Enough. Venus held up one perfectly manicured hand. I don't want to hear your excuses. What I want is for you to march into my office right now and see the mess you created. Then I want you to explain to me how you're going to make this right. Peter's heart raced as he followed Venus and Rebecca down the hallway toward the corner office. The door stood open, revealing what looked like the aftermath of a small explosion. Papers were scattered across the floor, Venus's coffee cup lay in ceramic pieces near the window, and her keyboard did indeed have what appeared to be coffee stains covering the keys. Well, Venus crossed her arms and stared at Peter with undisguised contempt. What do you have to say for yourself now? Peter stared at the destruction in genuine bewilderment. He had been in this office just 3 hours ago, and it had been immaculate. Someone had clearly come in after he left and created this disaster. But who would do such a thing? And more importantly, who would believe him if he tried to explain what really happened? I don't understand, Peter said honestly. This isn't how I left your office. Someone else had to have come in here after I finished cleaning. Venus's face flushed red with anger. So now you're doubling down on your lies? Not only are you incompetent, but you're also a liar and a coward who can't take responsibility for his own actions. Mrs. Sterling, please. I understand how this looks, but I swear to you that I didn't leave your office like this. Maybe we could check the security cameras. The security cameras? Venus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Oh, that's rich. You want me to waste company resources investigating your obvious screw-up because you're too much of a coward to admit what you did. Rebecca looked up from her tablet. Actually, Venus, maybe we should check the footage. It would help with the incident report if we had visual confirmation of what happened. Venus whirled around to face her HR director with fury blazing in her eyes. Are you questioning my judgment, Rebecca? Are you suggesting that I'm wrong about what happened in my own office? Rebecca immediately backed down, her face going pale. No, of course not. I was just thinking about documentation for the file. You're absolutely right that Peter is responsible for this mess. Peter watched this exchange with growing despair. Even if Rebecca had been willing to advocate for checking the security footage, Venus would never allow it. The CEO had already decided that Peter was guilty, and nothing would change her mind. Here's what's going to happen, Venus announced, turning back to Peter with a smile that made his skin crawl. You're going to clean up this entire mess tonight, on your own time. You're going to replace my coffee cup with an identical one, which I happen to know costs $3,000 because it's a limited edition piece from a famous ceramic artist. Peter's face went white. $3,000 was more money than he had seen in his entire life. His parents had cut him off financially when he decided to pursue art instead of business, and his internship at Prestige Marketing was supposed to be his pathway to a real career. He survived on freelance graphic design work that barely covered his rent for a tiny studio apartment in Queens. Mrs. Sterling, I don't have $3,000. My internship doesn't pay anything, and I can barely afford food and rent as it is. Maybe I could pay you back in installments over time. Oh, you'll pay me back all right, Venus said with satisfaction. You're going to reimburse me $50 per week until the debt is paid in full. That means you'll be working here for over a year just to pay for your little accident. But that's more than a year of payments for something I didn't even do, Peter protested weakly. Venus stepped so close that Peter could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the lingering scent of her fury. Let me make something very clear to you, Peter Graham. You are nothing. You come from nothing. You have nothing, and you will be nothing. The only reason you're even allowed in this building is because I decided to take pity on you and offer you this internship. She gestured around the office with theatrical flair. Look around you. This is what success looks like. This corner office, this view of Manhattan, this company that employs 200 people and generates millions in revenue every year. I built all of this with my own hands while people like you were making excuses and blaming others for their failures. Peter stood frozen as Venus continued her verbal assault. Every word felt like a physical blow, but he couldn't seem to move or defend himself. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Venus continued relentlessly. I see a weak, pathetic boy who will never amount to anything because he doesn't have what it takes to succeed in the real world. You're soft, you're entitled, and you think the world owes you something just because you exist. Rebecca nodded along enthusiastically, adding her own commentary. Venus is absolutely right, Peter. This internship is a privilege, not a right. Maybe this incident will teach you some valuable lessons about responsibility and accountability. I want you to think about something, Venus said, her voice taking on a mockingly sweet tone. Every successful person in this company started somewhere. Jake Morrison was an intern once too, but you know what the difference is between him and you? He took responsibility for his mistakes. He worked harder than everyone else. He proved that he deserved to be here. She pointed toward the scattered papers on the floor. Jake would never have left my office looking like a disaster zone. And if he had somehow made a mistake, he would have owned up to it immediately and figured out how to make it right without whining about money or making excuses. Peter's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just making excuses because he couldn't handle the pressure of working at a real company. Maybe successful people didn't question their superiors or ask for security footage when they were accused of something. I understand, Mrs. Sterling, Peter said quietly. I'll clean up the office tonight and figure out how to pay you back for the cup. Good, Venus said with satisfaction. And Peter, I want you here at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning for a staff meeting. We're going to discuss this incident with the entire leadership team so everyone can learn from your mistake. Peter's stomach dropped even further. The thought of being humiliated in front of all the executives and senior staff members made him feel physically sick, but he knew there was no point in arguing. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I'll be here at 6. Excellent. Venus smoothed down her suit jacket and checked her expensive watch. Rebecca, make sure this incident is properly documented. I want a full report on my desk by tomorrow afternoon detailing Peter's misconduct and the steps we're taking to address it. As Venus and Rebecca left the office, Peter sank down onto his knees among the scattered papers. The ceramic pieces of the coffee cup glittered in the harsh fluorescent light like tiny daggers. He began picking them up carefully, trying not to cut himself on the sharp edges. $3,000. $50 per week for over a year. A public humiliation in front of the entire leadership team. All for something he knew with absolute certainty that he had not done. Peter worked through the night, reorganizing every document according to Venus's impossible standards, scrubbing coffee stains from the keyboard, and vacuuming up every speck of ceramic debris. By the time the sun started to rise over Manhattan, Venus's office looked perfect once again. As Peter packed up his cleaning supplies, he caught sight of his reflection in Venus's office window. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were red from exhaustion and suppressed tears. He looked exactly like what Venus had called him, nothing. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice whispered that this wasn't right, that no one deserved to be treated this way, regardless of their position or circumstances. That voice was getting harder and harder to ignore with each passing day. Peter had no way of knowing that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. He had no idea that forces beyond his understanding were already in motion, or that his quiet dignity in the face of cruelty was being noticed by someone who had the power to change everything. For now, all he could do was gather his things and prepare for another day of humiliation at the hands of Venus Sterling. But karma has a way of keeping score, and Venus's bill was about to come due in the most spectacular way possible. The boardroom at Prestige Marketing Agency buzzed with nervous energy as the leadership team assembled for the 6 a.m. meeting. Executives clutched their coffee cups like lifelines, wondering why Venus Sterling had called such an early gathering. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the crystal chandelier, reflecting the worried faces of 25 senior staff members. Peter Graham stood in the corner of the room like a condemned man awaiting execution. His thrift store shirt was wrinkled from sleeping in the office, and dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. He had managed maybe 2 hours of rest curled up on the lobby couch before janitors arrived and kicked him out. Venus Sterling swept into the boardroom wearing a blood-red power suit that made her look like a predator among prey. Her platinum hair was styled to perfection, and her makeup was flawless despite the early hour. She commanded attention simply by existing in the space. "Good morning, everyone," Venus announced, her voice cutting through the morning chatter. "I've called this meeting to address a serious breach of trust and professionalism that occurred in our office last night." All eyes turned to Peter, who felt his cheeks burn with shame. He wanted to disappear into the marble floor beneath his feet. "As many of you know, we have an intern program designed to give young people opportunities to learn about our industry," Venus continued, pacing behind her chair at the head of the table. "Unfortunately, some interns seem to believe that being here is a right rather than a privilege." Jake Morrison, the VP of Marketing, leaned forward with interest. His perfectly styled hair and designer suit made him look like he had stepped out of a magazine spread. "What exactly happened, Venus?" Venus gestured dramatically toward Peter. "Our intern here decided to redecorate my office last night. He shattered a $3,000 ceramic piece, scattered confidential documents across the floor, and damaged company equipment." Rebecca Torres, ever the loyal lieutenant, nodded gravely from her seat. "I've documented everything in a formal incident report. The destruction was quite extensive." Peter opened his mouth to defend himself, but Venus held up a warning finger. "I'm not finished speaking." The room fell silent again. Peter noticed that several executives were staring at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. These were successful people who had worked their way up the corporate ladder, and here he was being presented as everything they despised about entitled young people. When confronted about his actions, Venus continued, "Peter chose to lie rather than take responsibility. He suggested that someone else was responsible for his mess. He even had the audacity to request that we waste company resources reviewing security footage to cover up his incompetence." Amanda Chun, the creative director, shook her head disapprovingly. "That's exactly the kind of attitude that's wrong with young people today. No accountability, always looking for someone else to blame." "Precisely," Venus said with satisfaction, "which is why I've decided to turn this unfortunate incident into a teaching moment for everyone in this room." She walked over to stand directly behind Peter, placing her hands on his shoulders like a puppet master controlling a marionette. "Peter is going to demonstrate what real accountability looks like. He's going to spend the next several months making amends for his actions through service to this company." Peter felt Venus's manicured nails digging into his shoulders through his thin shirt. The pressure was painful, but he didn't dare move or complain. "From now on," Venus announced, "Peter will be personally responsible for maintaining the cleanliness and organization of this boardroom. Every morning before our meetings, he'll ensure that every surface is spotless, every chair is perfectly positioned, and every piece of equipment is functioning properly." She pushed Peter forward slightly, forcing him to step closer to the conference table. "In fact, let's start right now. Peter, I noticed that the table has some water spots on it. Please clean it immediately." Peter's face burned with humiliation as he realized what Venus was asking him to do. Clean the conference table while 25 executives watched and judged him. His hands trembled as he pulled a cloth from his pocket and began wiping down the already spotless surface. "Look at that technique," Venus said mockingly. "So thorough, so dedicated. This is what happens when someone finally learns the value of hard work." The executives murmured among themselves, some looking uncomfortable with the public humiliation while others seemed to enjoy the spectacle. Peter kept his eyes down, focusing on his task while trying to block out their whispered comments. "Maybe we should all take notes," suggested David Kim, the chief financial officer. "This is clearly what happens when someone doesn't appreciate the opportunities they've been given." Venus smiled coldly. "Excellent point, David. Peter, since you're already down there, Why don't you check under the table for any dust or debris? We want to make sure our work environment is absolutely perfect. Peter's stomach clenched as he realized what Venus was asking him to do. Get down on his hands and knees in front of all these powerful people and crawl under the conference table like an animal. The humiliation was designed to break him, to make him quit and disappear from their lives forever. But Peter needed this internship. Despite everything Venus had put him through, it was still his only pathway to a career in marketing. He had no connections, no family wealth, and no other options. So he slowly lowered himself to his hands and knees and crawled under the massive conference table. The carpet was rough against his palms as he moved from chair to chair, pretending to clean surfaces that were already immaculate. Above him, he could hear the executives discussing quarterly projections and client presentations as if he were invisible. The conversation flowed around him like he was nothing more than furniture. The Henderson account is looking very promising, Jake Morrison was saying. I think we could see a 30% increase in their spending if we position ourselves correctly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, Venus replied approvingly. People who understand that success requires sacrifice and dedication. People who don't make excuses when things get difficult. Peter knew that comment was directed at him, even though Venus pretended to be having a normal business conversation. Every word was carefully chosen to remind him of his place in their world. As the meeting dragged on, Peter's knees began to ache from crawling on the hard floor. His shoulders burned from the awkward position, and his hands were raw from gripping the rough carpet fibers. But he endured it all in silence, knowing that any complaint would only make things worse. Finally, after what felt like hours, Venus dismissed the meeting. The executives filed out of the boardroom, some avoiding eye contact with Peter, while others stared at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Only when the last person had left did Peter finally crawl out from under the table. Venus remained behind, organizing papers in her leather portfolio with deliberately slow movements. She wanted to savor this moment, to let Peter fully absorb the lesson she had just taught him. I hope you learned something valuable today, Venus said without looking up from her papers. This is what happens when you try to lie to me. This is what happens when you don't show proper respect for your superiors. Peter stood up slowly, his legs shaking from the prolonged kneeling. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I understand. Good. Because this is just the beginning. Venus finally looked at him, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Your real education starts now. Over the following weeks, Venus's campaign of humiliation escalated to new levels of cruelty. She seemed to take genuine pleasure in finding new ways to degrade and embarrass Peter in front of their colleagues. She began requiring him to personally deliver her dry cleaning from a boutique shop 30 blocks away. The round trip took over 2 hours on public transportation, time that Peter couldn't afford to lose from his freelance graphic design work. But Venus insisted that it was part of his learning about client service and attention to detail. The dry cleaning pickup became a daily ritual of humiliation. Peter would arrive at the boutique wearing his worn sneakers and thrift store clothes, clearly out of place among the wealthy clientele who frequented the establishment. The staff treated him with barely concealed contempt, assuming he was some kind of delivery boy rather than recognizing him as a person with hopes and dreams of his own. Venus also began sending him on elaborate coffee runs that seemed designed purely to waste his time and energy. She would order complicated drinks from specialty cafes scattered across Manhattan, insisting that each beverage had to be from a specific location and prepared exactly to her specifications. I need my morning latte from Cafe Celestial on the Upper East Side, she would announce. But make sure they use oat milk, not almond milk. And I want exactly 1.5 pumps of vanilla syrup, not 2. If they get it wrong, you'll have to go back and order it again. These coffee runs often took 3 hours or more, especially when Venus inevitably found something wrong with the drinks and sent Peter back to fix her imaginary complaints. He would arrive back at the office exhausted and defeated, only to find that Venus had assigned him additional tasks that needed to be completed immediately. The worst part was that Venus had begun timing his absences and docking his future pay for the time he spent away from the office. Since Peter was an unpaid intern, this meant that his debt for the ceramic coffee cup was actually growing rather than shrinking. Venus had created a system where Peter could never escape his obligation to her. You were gone for 3.5 hours today, Venus would announce loudly in front of other employees. "That's 3.5 hours of company time that you owe me. I'm adding $50 to your debt for the productivity loss." Peter began sleeping in the office more frequently because he couldn't afford the subway fare for daily round trips to Queens. He would curl up on the lobby couch after the security guards finished their rounds, setting his phone alarm for 5 a.m. so he could shower in the employee restroom and change clothes before anyone arrived. His diet consisted entirely of vending machine snacks and whatever free food he could find at office events. When prestige marketing catered lunch meetings, Peter would linger near the conference rooms, hoping someone would offer him leftover sandwiches or salad. More often than not, he went hungry. The other employees began to notice Peter's deteriorating condition, but none of them were willing to intervene. Venus had made it clear that Peter was being punished for his own mistakes, and challenging her judgment would be career suicide for anyone who valued their job. "Poor kid looks like he's wasting away," whispered Linda Rodriguez, one of the junior account managers, to her colleague during a coffee break. "Maybe he should have thought about that before he destroyed Venus's office," replied Tom Watson, an associate creative director who was hoping for a promotion. "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." But Peter's suffering was far from over. Venus had saved her most devastating humiliation for a day when the office was hosting a major client presentation. Pinnacle Industries, a potential $50 million account, was coming to see Prestige Marketing's capabilities and decide whether to award them their business. The entire office buzzed with nervous energy as employees prepared for the presentation. The conference room was decorated with fresh flowers. The catering was from Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, and every surface gleamed with professional polish. Venus wore her most expensive suit for the occasion, a navy blue ensemble that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her hair was styled by a professional, and her makeup was applied with the precision of a work of art. She looked like the embodiment of corporate success. "Peter," Venus called out an hour before the clients were scheduled to arrive. "I need you to do something very important for me." Peter hurried over, hoping that Venus might finally give him a task that would allow him to contribute something valuable to the presentation. Maybe she would let him help with the visual displays or assist with the technical setup. "The executive restroom needs to be cleaned," Venus announced loudly enough for several nearby employees to hear. "I want you to scrub every surface until it sparkles. Our clients might need to use the facilities, and I won't have them thinking we're anything less than perfect." Peter's heart sank, but he nodded obediently. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. I'll take care of it right away." "Good. And Peter," Venus smiled with false sweetness, "make sure you use the small brush I keep in the supply closet. I want you to get into every corner, every crevice. Really make it shine." As Peter walked toward the supply closet, he heard Venus explaining to Rebecca Torres in a voice loud enough for him to overhear. "It's so important to teach young people that no job is beneath them. Peter is learning that success requires humility and hard work." The supply closet contained cleaning supplies that were clearly meant for professional janitorial services, not for intern punishment. But Venus had specifically mentioned a small brush, and Peter found it nestled behind bottles of industrial-strength cleaner. It was a toothbrush. Venus wanted him to clean the executive restroom with a toothbrush while $50 million clients toured the office. The humiliation was so complete, so deliberately designed to break his spirit, that Peter felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. But he couldn't quit. He had nowhere else to go, no other opportunities, and no support system to fall back on. So Peter took the toothbrush and headed to the executive restroom, knowing that his degradation was about to reach new depths. The restroom was already spotless, maintained by professional cleaners who came in every night. But Peter dutifully got down on his hands and knees and began scrubbing tile grout with the tiny brush. The work was backbreaking and pointless, designed purely to humiliate him rather than accomplish anything useful. As he worked, Peter could hear the sounds of the client presentation beginning in the nearby conference room. Venus's voice carried through the walls as she pitched Prestige Marketing's services with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own success. "At Prestige Marketing, we believe that excellence is not an accident," Venus was saying. "It's the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. We represent the skillful choice of many alternatives." Peter scrubbed harder at an imaginary stain, wondering if the clients knew that their potential agency was run by someone who tormented unpaid interns for sport. He wondered if they would care, or if success in the corporate world required a complete absence of empathy for others. The presentation continued for over an hour, with Venus's voice rising and falling as she demonstrated slide presentations and outlined marketing strategies. Peter finished cleaning the restroom twice over, but he knew better than to leave his post without explicit permission. Finally, as the client presentation was winding down, Peter heard footsteps approaching the executive restroom. His heart raced as he realized that one of the pinnacle industry's executives was coming to use the facilities. He would be discovered on his hands and knees with a toothbrush, the living embodiment of Venus's corporate philosophy. The door opened, and Peter looked up to see a distinguished man in an expensive suit staring down at him with surprise and confusion. The man appeared to be in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed genuinely troubled by what he was witnessing. "Excuse me," the man said gently. "Are you all right?" Peter scrambled to his feet, his face burning with shame. "Yes, sir. I'm just finishing up some cleaning. The restroom is ready for you to use." The man studied Peter's face with an expression that seemed almost familiar, though Peter couldn't place where he might have seen this person before. There was something in the man's eyes that looked like recognition, followed quickly by anger. "What's your name, son?" the man asked quietly. "Peter Graham, sir. I'm an intern here at Prestige Marketing." The man's expression darkened further. "Peter Graham," he repeated slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. "And they have you cleaning restrooms with a toothbrush?" Peter didn't know how to respond. Admitting the truth would mean betraying Venus and probably losing his internship, but lying to this kind stranger felt wrong too. "It's part of my learning experience," Peter said carefully. "Mrs. Sterling believes in teaching interns about all aspects of business operations." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And how long have you been working here, Peter?" "About 6 months, sir." 6 months. The man seemed to be processing this information with growing displeasure. "And in those 6 months, how much have you been paid for your work?" Peter's cheeks reddened again. "It's an unpaid internship, sir, but I'm learning valuable skills that will help me in my future career." The man stared at Peter for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "Peter, I want you to call this number tomorrow morning," the man said, pressing the card into Peter's hand. "Ask for Harrison Graham. Tell him that his grandfather sent you." Peter looked down at the business card in confusion. The name meant nothing to him, but the logo was familiar from business magazines and news articles. Graham Industries was one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the world. "Sir, I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake," the man said firmly. "Call that number, Peter. It's very important that you do." Before Peter could ask any more questions, the man had disappeared back down the hallway toward the conference room. Peter stared at the business card in his trembling hands, wondering what had just happened and why this stranger seemed to know something about him that he didn't understand. He tucked the card into his pocket and resumed cleaning the already spotless restroom, unaware that his life had just taken a turn that would change everything. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, and Venus Sterling's reign of terror was about to come to a spectacular end. But first, she had one more humiliation planned for Peter Graham. And this time, she was going to make sure everyone in the company witnessed his complete and total degradation. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Peter's mood as he shuffled into the Prestige Marketing building at 5:30 a.m. The business card from the mysterious client sat heavy in his pocket, but he hadn't worked up the courage to make the phone call yet. What if it was some kind of test from Venus? What if she had somehow orchestrated the entire encounter to see if he would be disloyal to the company? Peter made his way to the 42nd floor, expecting another day of humiliation and degradation. But as the elevator doors opened, he was greeted by an unusual amount of activity for such an early hour. Security guards in expensive suits stood at attention near the reception desk, and several people in business attire were setting up equipment in the main conference room. Venus Sterling stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, speaking in hushed tones with Rebecca Torres. She wore a black power suit that made her look like she was dressed for a funeral, though her expression suggested she was planning a celebration instead. "Peter," Venus called out sharply when she noticed him. "Perfect timing. We have some very important visitors coming today, and I want everything to be absolutely perfect." Peter approached cautiously, noting the predatory gleam in Venus's eyes. Experience had taught him that her good moods were often more dangerous than her obvious anger. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. What would you like me to do?" Venus smiled with false sweetness. "I've arranged a special surprise for you today. Some very influential people are going to witness your commitment to excellence and personal growth. Think of it as a performance review." Rebecca nodded enthusiastically from behind her tablet. "This is such a wonderful opportunity for you, Peter. Not many interns get this kind of personalized attention from senior management." The elevator chimed again, and the doors opened to reveal Jake Morrison looking uncharacteristically nervous. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and he clutched his coffee cup like a lifeline. "Venus," Jake said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I just got a call from our contact at Pinnacle Industries. They're not just sending their marketing team today. The CEO and board of directors are coming personally." Venus's smile widened. Even better. The more witnesses to Peter's transformation, the more meaningful the lesson becomes. Peter felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever Venus had planned for today was going to be worse than anything she had done before. The presence of high-profile clients meant that his humiliation would be public and complete. "I want you to understand something very important, Peter," Venus continued, turning to face him directly. "Today is about accountability. Today is about showing everyone what happens when someone tries to take shortcuts and avoid responsibility for their actions." She gestured toward the conference room where the security guards were still setting up equipment. "We're going to have a little demonstration for our guests. You're going to show them exactly how you've learned to take pride in your work, no matter how menial the task might seem." Peter's mouth went dry. "What kind of demonstration, Mrs. Sterling?" "Oh, it's going to be wonderful," Venus said with genuine enthusiasm. "You're going to clean this entire floor while our distinguished guests observe and learn from your example. Every surface, every corner, every piece of furniture. And you're going to do it with the same attention to detail that you should have shown in my office that night." The blood drained from Peter's face. Venus wanted him to perform janitorial work in front of the CEO and board of directors of Pinnacle Industries. She wanted to turn him into a living object lesson about failure and redemption, a cautionary tale that these powerful people could take back to their own companies. "Mrs. Sterling, please," Peter said quietly. "I understand that I need to make amends for what happened, but maybe there's another way." "Another way?" Venus's voice rose dangerously. "Are you questioning my judgment again, Peter? Are you suggesting that you know better than I do how to handle this situation?" Rebecca stepped forward, tapping furiously on her tablet. "This is exactly the kind of attitude that got you into trouble in the first place, Peter. Mrs. Sterling is offering you a chance to rebuild your reputation, and you're responding with more excuses and resistance." Peter felt trapped. Every word out of his mouth seemed to make things worse, but staying silent felt like accepting a level of degradation that might destroy what little self-respect he had left. "I just want to do good work," Peter said desperately. "I want to contribute something meaningful to the company. Maybe I could help with the presentation or assist with client relations." Venus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Contribute something meaningful? Peter, you've been here for 6 months, and your greatest accomplishment is learning how to properly clean a conference room. What exactly do you think you could contribute to a meeting with Fortune 500 executives?" Jake Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that Venus was going too far, but unwilling to intervene. "Maybe we should focus on the client presentation," he suggested weakly. "Make sure we're ready for when they arrive." "Oh, we're going to be more than ready," Venus said with satisfaction. "We're going to give them a demonstration they'll never forget. Peter is going to show them what real accountability looks like." The elevator chimed again, and this time the doors revealed a group of impeccably dressed men and women who radiated the confidence of people accustomed to wielding enormous power. But at the head of the group stood the same distinguished gentleman who had found Peter cleaning the restroom with a toothbrush the day before. Peter's heart raced as he recognized the man's kind eyes and silver hair. The stranger who had given him the business card was apparently part of the Pinnacle Industries delegation. But why had he given Peter a card with someone else's name on it? "Welcome to Prestige Marketing," Venus announced, her voice taking on the polished tone she reserved for important clients. "I'm Venus Sterling, CEO and founder. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here today." The silver-haired man stepped forward, his expression neutral, but his eyes scanning the room with the intensity of someone conducting an inspection. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Sterling. I'm Harrison Graham, Chairman and CEO of Graham Industries." Venus's face went pale for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "Graham Industries? I thought you were with Pinnacle Industries." "Pinnacle Industries is one of our subsidiary companies," Harrison explained calmly. "I apologize for any confusion. I wanted to observe your operations personally before we finalize any business relationships." Peter felt the business card burning in his pocket. Harrison Graham, the same name the mysterious client had told him to ask for. But that would mean this powerful CEO was somehow connected to him personally. It was impossible. It had to be some kind of coincidence. "Of course," Venus said, though her smile looked strained. "We're honored to have someone of your stature visit our offices. I've prepared a very special demonstration of our company culture and values." Harrison's gaze fell on Peter, who was standing awkwardly near the reception desk in his worn clothes and scuffed shoes. "I see. And what does this demonstration involve?" Venus's confidence returned as she prepared to showcase what she clearly considered her masterpiece of corporate discipline. "This is Peter Graham, one of our interns. He's going to demonstrate the kind of work ethic and attention to detail that we instill in all our employees." Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but Peter noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Peter Graham, you said?" "Yes, a local boy who's been learning some valuable lessons about responsibility and accountability," Venus continued, oblivious to the dangerous undercurrents in the conversation. "Peter, please show our guest your cleaning supplies." Peter reluctantly retrieved the bucket and mop that Venus had positioned near the reception desk, his face burning with shame. The executives from Graham Industries watched with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed disgust. "Interesting approach," Harrison said quietly. "And how long has Peter been working in this capacity?" 6 months, Venus announced proudly. "He started as a regular intern, but after some disciplinary issues, we restructured his role to focus on more fundamental lessons about the nature of work and responsibility." Harrison stepped closer to Peter, his presence somehow both comforting and intimidating. "Peter, I'm curious about your background. Where did you grow up?" Peter glanced nervously at Venus, who nodded encouragingly. She seemed to think that Harrison's questions were part of some kind of corporate mentorship exercise. "Queens, sir. My parents, they wanted me to study business, but I was more interested in art and design. We had some disagreements about my career path." "I see. And your family name is Graham?" "Yes, sir. My father is Robert Graham, and my mother is Patricia. They own a small accounting firm in Queens." Harrison's expression remained perfectly controlled, but several of the other executives exchanged meaningful glances. Peter noticed the subtle communication but couldn't interpret what it meant. "Robert and Patricia Graham," Harrison repeated slowly. "And they cut off financial support when you chose to pursue art instead of business?" Peter nodded miserably, wondering why this powerful CEO was interested in his family drama. "They said I needed to learn the value of hard work and independence. They thought this internship would teach me about the real world." Venus beamed with satisfaction. "And it has been educational, hasn't it, Peter? You've learned so much about humility and dedication. Now, please begin your demonstration for our guests." But Harrison held up a hand to stop Peter from moving toward his cleaning supplies. "Actually, Mrs. Sterling, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here." Venus's smile faltered slightly. "Misunderstanding? I don't understand." Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. "Patricia, it's your father. I need you and Robert to come to Manhattan immediately. I've found Peter." The color drained completely from Venus's face as the implications of Harrison's words began to sink in. Peter stared at the phone in confusion, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "Grandfather," Peter whispered, the word falling from his lips like a prayer. Harrison smiled for the first time since entering the office, his stern expression melting into something warm and loving. "Hello, Peter. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Venus stumbled backward, her hand clutching at Rebecca's arm for support. "Grandfather? But that's impossible. Peter is just an intern. He's nobody special. He's just a poor kid from Queens who doesn't have any connections or family money." "Peter Graham," Harrison announced to the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention, "is my grandson and the sole heir to Graham Industries. He's worth approximately $6.2 billion, and he's been working as an unpaid intern in your company for 6 months." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake Morrison's coffee cup slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Rebecca Torres stared at her tablet, as if it might provide some explanation for the impossible situation unfolding before her eyes. Peter felt like the world was spinning around him. "But my parents said, they told me you had disowned the family. They said you wanted nothing to do with us after Dad chose accounting over manufacturing." Harrison's expression softened with regret. "Your parents and I had a disagreement about independence and character 25 years ago. I thought they were too sheltered, too protected from the realities of the world. I wanted them to understand the value of honest work before they inherited anything." He looked around the office with disgust. "But I never intended for my test to result in this kind of abuse and exploitation. I've been having you investigated for months, trying to understand who you really were. When I saw you yesterday, cleaning a bathroom with a toothbrush while being treated like a servant, I knew the test had gone too far." Venus found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Investigated? You've been watching us." One of Harrison's assistants stepped forward with a tablet full of documents. "We have recordings of every interaction, every instance of abuse, every violation of labor law and human dignity. Mrs. Sterling, you've been exploiting an unpaid intern for 6 months while charging him money for imaginary damages and forcing him to perform degrading tasks for your entertainment." "But the coffee cup," Venus protested weakly. "He destroyed my office. He was lying about what happened." Harrison's expression turned ice cold. "My investigators reviewed your security footage, Mrs. Sterling. You destroyed your own office that night to create a reason to punish Peter. You threw papers around, smashed your own coffee cup, and spilled liquid on your keyboard. Then you blamed him for your deliberate sabotage." The room erupted into chaos as the full scope of Venus's cruelty became clear. The Graham Industries executives began speaking in urgent whispers while Rebecca Torres frantically tried to access damage control protocols on her tablet. Furthermore, Harrison continued relentlessly. "Graham Industries owns 60% of prestige marketing through a network of shell corporations and investment funds. Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling. You've been torturing my grandson while he was technically your employer." Venus swayed on her feet, her face going from pale to green as the reality of her situation crashed down on her. "That's impossible. We would have known if Graham Industries owned us." "Corporate ownership structures can be quite complex," Harrison said with cold satisfaction, "especially when they're designed to remain hidden until the appropriate moment for revelation." He turned to Peter, his expression becoming gentle again. "Peter, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I wanted you to understand the value of hard work and humility, but I never intended for you to be abused and degraded. This is my fault for not monitoring the situation more closely." Peter stared at his grandfather in wonder, still struggling to accept that his life had just changed completely. "So all of this is real." "Very real," Harrison confirmed. "And your first decision as heir to Graham Industries is what to do with Mrs. Sterling and her company." All eyes turned to Peter, who stood in his thrift store clothes and scuffed shoes, suddenly the most powerful person in the room. Venus stared at him with naked terror, finally understanding that the young man she had tortured for months held her entire future in his hands. Peter looked around the office where he had suffered so much humiliation and abuse. He thought about all the nights he had slept on the lobby couch, all the meals he had skipped, all the times Venus had made him crawl on the floor while important people conducted business above his head. "Mrs. Sterling," Peter said quietly, his voice carrying a new authority that made everyone in the room lean forward to listen. "I want you to understand something very important." Venus nodded desperately, willing to agree to anything that might save her from complete destruction. "For 6 months, you told me that I was nothing. You said I came from nothing, I had nothing, and I would be nothing. You made me clean floors while you conducted meetings, forced me to crawl under tables like an animal, and charged me money for damages I didn't cause." Peter's voice grew stronger as he continued. "You took pleasure in my suffering. You enjoyed making me feel small and worthless and powerless. You turned my desperation into entertainment for yourself and your executives." Venus began to cry, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "Peter, please. I was just trying to teach you valuable lessons about work and responsibility. Everything I did was meant to help you grow as a person." "No," Peter said firmly. "Everything you did was meant to make you feel powerful at my expense. You're a bully and a sadist who got off on torturing someone you thought couldn't fight back." Harrison watched his grandson with obvious pride as Peter found his voice and his strength. The other executives remained silent, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. "So here's what's going to happen," Peter continued. "You're fired, Mrs. Sterling. Security will escort you from the building, and you have 10 minutes to clean out your personal belongings." Venus collapsed into a chair, her body shaking with sobs. "Please, Peter. This company is my whole life. I built it from nothing. Without prestige marketing, I have nothing left. Now you know how it feels," Peter said without sympathy. "But I'm not completely heartless. I'm going to offer you the same choice you offered me 6 months ago." Venus looked up hopefully through her tears, grasping at any possibility of redemption. "You can face criminal charges for labor law violations, wage theft, and workplace abuse," Peter explained calmly. "Or you can accept a learning position that will teach you some valuable lessons about humility and hard work." "What kind of learning position?" Venus asked desperately. Peter smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. "Unpaid intern. You'll work under my direct supervision, performing whatever tasks I assign to you. You'll learn what it feels like to be powerless, to have your dignity stripped away, and to depend on the mercy of someone who has every reason to hate you." The justice of it was poetic and complete. Venus Sterling, who had built her empire by stepping on others, would now experience what it felt like to be stepped on herself. "And Mrs. Sterling?" Peter added as his grandfather's security team prepared to escort her from the building. "Your first assignment is to handwrite a 50-page apology letter detailing every instance of abuse you inflicted on me, just like you made me rewrite those documents with a pen when you claimed I had damaged them." As Venus was led away in tears, Peter turned to face the employees who had watched his humiliation for 6 months without intervening. Jake Morrison, Rebecca Torres, and the others stared at him with expressions of shock and fear, finally understanding that their new boss remembered exactly how they had treated him. But Peter had learned something important during his months of suffering. True power didn't come from revenge or cruelty. It came from choosing to be better than the people who had hurt you. "Ladies and gentlemen," Peter announced to the remaining staff, "Prestige Marketing is going to become a different kind of company. We're going to treat every employee with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or circumstances. We're going to pay fair wages and provide real opportunities for growth and advancement." He looked around the office one last time, remembering the pain and humiliation he had endured within these walls. But instead of bitterness, he felt something unexpected: gratitude. Venus's cruelty had taught him valuable lessons about empathy, resilience, and the importance of using power responsibly. "Oh, and one more thing," Peter said as his grandfather's legal team began documenting everything for the inevitable lawsuits. "We're converting the executive restroom into a meditation space for employees who need a quiet place to decompress during stressful days. I think it's time that room was used for healing instead of humiliation." As Peter walked toward his grandfather's waiting limousine, he pulled the business card from his pocket and smiled. Sometimes the universe had a way of balancing the scales of justice, even when it seemed like cruelty would triumph forever. Venus Sterling had spent 6 months teaching Peter Graham that he was nothing. Now she would spend the next several months learning that in the game of karma, everyone eventually gets exactly what they deserve.